Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Lesedi Bakwani. Today we are releasing the financial statistics of higher education institutions for the 2016 period. We are joined in Cape Town. Who's there in Cape Town? Andile, are you there?
Yes, I'm here listening.
Yes, Andile. We have the Statistician-General who's going to give us a presentation. And he has, as part of his delegation, Mr. Michael Manamela, who's the Chief Director for Economic Statistics, Ms. Elizabeth Makafola, who is the Director for Public Government Institutions, and we also have Dr. Patrick Naidu. Statistician General will take your presentation, after which we will invite you for the questions. SG, we're not wasting time, let's go.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Yes, no, thank you very much. These are your pieces of paper. Well, we are presenting financial statistics for higher education institutions. I see that they are going to get this water from somewhere, from Tennessee. I've been quoting Lincoln quite a lot today. That he was presiding over a case, and the lady had to take counsel from him, and the lady said, "Where can I get some water?" He said, "Tennessee." And that's how the lady fled. But I think the issue of education in South Africa is an important one. Very important in that there is even a commission on fees. It's a non-trivial matter. The report here that we are producing looks at financials, revenue and expenses, capital expenditure and cash flow. And the scope of the investigation is for the 26 higher education. Yes, no, bringing the water here. That will not expect a promotion. Probably you should, I suppose I'll tell my next, my successor to ensure that he promotes you because you drink bad water. And of course, it's based on the unit data. The distribution of, all of you are getting water, because I asked why, only I ask for water and you get the benefit. The distribution is, of course, by province, as you can see, the 26 institutions, which are universities as well as technocons. The crisis that we have in South Africa has its origins. In the statement by Verwoerd saying that what is the use of teaching a Bantu child mathematics when it can't use it in practice? So it's a very profound statement that he made. And of course, this culminated a number of years later, 25 years later, in 1976, from 1953, with an uprising in Soweto, where the students said, "No, you'll not study in Afrikaans." Then 40 years from 1976, we see fees must fall. What are we trying to solve? We're trying to solve a situation whereby we know in South Africa that the number of children born per woman has declined. And as it declines, you get a population that is 15 to 64. That almost in 2010 is about 65%. In China is 75%, meaning that the population below 15 is much smaller. So you are looking at what is the demographic dependency. In terms of those population shifts, you end up with a lower demographic dependency. But South Africa makes a much better fit with the Latin American countries than with the Asian tigers. And the key question is that of a demographic dividend, which is an emanation of a benefit from transitions in demography of high number of children born and high number of children lost who die, to a low number of children, or rather low number of children dying and the continued high number of children born, to then a low number of children born and a low number of children or people dying, and therefore bringing a big bulge in the age group 15 to 64. Therefore, there is a demographic dividend. So the context that we are dealing with has to be clear so that we don't just talk about higher education without understanding what the context is and what mystery we are trying to resolve, or mischief we are trying to resolve. But for that to happen, you actually need growth. And you can see what the average growth in China has been and the average growth in the Latin American countries has been, vis-a-vis what the average growth of South Africa has been over a period 1961 to 2015, a period of almost 55, 54 years. So the growth has been lackluster. But we see enrollment in students that has grown, and of course, we see what the proportion of students enrolled by race is, African, white, and so on. Whites are lower than 10% of the population, almost 9%. They have 16%, almost double their population is there. As degrees, Indians have what percentage of the population? 4%, and then they have 5% graduates, blacks 80%, and those in universities about 72% of the population of university. Now, how many children or students come into university year in, year out? Well, we can see the numbers are here from 2012 to 2016, 953, 963, 983, almost a million. Let's round it up to round it off, or round it up to a million. So this is the total number of these people that are at university, the student enrollment. And then the first year students here are 17.8, almost a constant number of intake of first year students, which is here 169, 158. Now, if the intake over this period is hovering around 160,000 into universities, for ease of arithmetic, let's say 150,000, so that we can multiply. And South African degrees are 3 years. Then the number of students that we expect at university is 450,000. Is that not so? Because if the intake is 150,000, times 3 is 450. But we have a million. Now, the question is, where do we get the million from? If the input is 150,000. There must be something that is happening in ensuring that ultimately we have a million when actually the intake is 150,000. Or am I dreaming? So, we have to keep this number. For a 3-year degree with 150,000 people coming into the system, which is very clear, you know how many matriculants go with exemption, 150,000 go into that system. But that system has 1 million people. If there are 100 children born every year, over 3 years, the number of children that we'll find in society should be 300, not 1 million, unless something is happening to those children. Now, this process is a process of birth, of creating new people into the university system. So there's something that is happening in the system that is trapping these people not to leave. So it's cumulative. Yeah. Yes. There are 1 million. So it means they are not going out of the system. Of course, the women, girl child is a very progressing. women are 52% in the population and men are 48%, but at university you find more women. At university. Now, by university, we have 975,000. I've said I'm rounding up to about a million. I mean, that's 975,000. From UNISA to Solplaatje, with 700 students. And this is what that enrollment has been across the years. And you can see which universities are having more students and which ones are having fewer students, with UNISA number actually reducing. Now, we also have the number of graduates increasing from 165 in 2012 to 203,000 that are coming out of the university. But this number, we have to understand it very well, that 87 of those, 1,000 of those, are the ones with a degree. The rest are certificate and so on, but they attended at university. So you got to understand that there is a mix of people there that are in the system. And now, given that there are those who do certificate, which is 1 year or 2 years, why do we have a million? Because if they are spending that short a time, they must be exiting the system much quicker because they don't stay. So there's something very typically wrong in the system that has double or more than double the number that is expected at university. A master's students, according to the report, it's about 7,000 or something like that, PhD, something else. Now, this is the expenditure. 2015 to 67 billion. In 2016, that's an increase of 11%. Tuition consisting of 32 grants, 44% grants have actually increased. I'm sure with NSFAS and so on. And of course, this is the distribution by university of what these grants are. And I'm sure people are waiting with abated breaths for the report on higher education, and we have to understand what is coming out of it. And of course, the expenses here in higher education, compensation of employees, 58%, goods and services, and that percentage hasn't changed that much. And by each institution, that's the distribution from the biggest university to the smallest. Now, we've talked about, we talk about revenue. What are the revenue in higher education? We can see the streams of revenue. One, which is in 2012, 2013, 2014, grants across time actually increasing, tuition also increasing, and of course other receipts also increasing from 20 to 30, from 15 to 21. That's the change in tuition. You can pass. Don't worry. For as long as you don't stand in front of the camera, and then I don't get seen. Now, in 2016, this is the amounts of money, with UNISA having the bulk of this money, 2.8, Pretoria 1.9, and so on. That is tuition fees, and then of course grants as well, grants received. And what are the distribution of grants from national government into universities and universities of technology? The university is taking a lion's share. I mean, they are out of the 26 institutions, the bulk of those are universities. And then, of course, other receipts of to the universities of 15 billion, with VETS getting the lion's share and Northwest getting the lion's share. Research, other expenses, compensation of employees, that is expenditure now. We've got 33 billion, and of course, there UNISA taking 4.52 billion out of the 33 billion, and Solplaatje 86 million. And purchases of goods and services, Pretoria University, UNISA coming second, and others following in terms of education. CAPEX, what has happened to capital expenditure in these institutions? Here we are looking at higher education, CAPEX, Pretoria University having the highest spending, Stellenbosch following, Wits, and then of course Mpumalanga because it's a new university, and Sol Plaatje with us a new university to start from scratch. So, and then of course enrollment, UNISA is just comes out like a sore toe with almost 300,000 students. We have seen that UNISA has dropped from 338 now to 299,000, and then of Northwest and all these other universities. And by institution, student environment, enrollment, of course, we are repeating that there. We are looking at revenue sources, stream of revenue, 61 billion and 67 billion. Now, this is the financial performance. We want to see in the population how many people, or rather what proportion of the population has different levels of education. That's the next thing that I want to talk about. Because, I mean, yes, these are important things to look at, but we need to know, well, what are the outcomes of this? What are the, more or less moving towards what is the education system? And of course, if we look at this, you can see there's a progression ratios, that is, which means is how do you, as a cohort that is born today, go through the system for subsequent years? So you can see here, this one, this progression ratio here, is about people who are now in the population from about 1950, who have done grade 7. Now you can see whites here were already having grade 7, long before in the 50s, when blacks, only 54% of them had their grade 7 that we could find in the population in the 50s. But now they've progressed very rapidly, and they have caught up, and of course the Indians caught up with the whites a long time ago. They all have grade 7, they're educated. Now here we are looking at those who have grade 9. Of course, whites have always been having the privilege of better education. From the 50s, which you can see, they've always had that. The Indians caught up very drastically after Verwoerd said, what's the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics in 1953, because this is what corresponds with 1953 about here. And then the Indians followed a different trajectory, while the colors and the blacks were struggling at the bottom. Now here we are looking at those who grade 12 up to 2016. Where are we? You can see the gap in higher education between that and this one here. Of course, there are more blacks in the country, 80% of them are. So naturally, as the doors of learning open, more of them will go to university. Now the next graph is one where we want to see what is the performance. You will recall that we said there are 200 who graduate from university. But those graduates include certificates and all that. We want 87,000 who actually get a degree from that higher institution of learning, which is a training. And we want to see how that is performing as a system. Because one of the things that we have to do and to know is that these universities are knowledge creators and therefore catalyze economic growth, which in that graph you saw that the Chinese 6.7%, South Africa 1%, average growth from the 60s up to now. Whereas China in that period averaged 6.7%. And the Asian tigers averaged that almost about 5%. Now let's see what has happened to this population since then and now, because this is very important. The time that we have now of fees must fall have to be contextualized in how much we spend at university education and what its throughputs are. So, I need to go back a bit. You see, this graph, this axis here, which is called the y-axis. I don't know why they call it a y-axis, and this one the x-axis, but they label them that way. The vertical and the horizontal. Here we are looking at years. And here we are looking at the proportion of people who started as a cohort at a particular point in time in acquiring education of sorts. and we have broken it by race. And now we look at them across time, how they have performed. Now, from whatever starting point you are, the ideal is at least to stay where you are. That is, the cohort succeeds. Each one of them succeeds through the system. When you are improving, the graph will go up that way, meaning that successive cohorts have a better proportion succeeding. It's like interest when you put money in there. Successively, if it stays there, it means no, it's not any interest. When it goes that way, it means it's being eaten by inflation. Or you have exposed your corrugated iron to KwaZulu-Natal salt, sea salt, and then it's being corroded by the sea salt. So when that thing goes, it means you are corroded. When it goes that way, it means you are improving. And when it goes flat, it means you are staying the same. Now let's see who is doing what. And of course, this is by race. And they will see what it labels at the end. Now you begin to understand what's happening. I've told you what it means. When it happens, it does what. So there you are. So this system which is constipated, this is what it is producing. Successive failure, year in, year out, in terms of the cause. And of course here is a graph by Mr. Spall, who actually went to count the number of, from the reports, to look at graduates. That is those with degrees qualifying from universities. In 1996, there were 5,000 blacks who were, and then by 2014, there were 48,000 who got a degree, not went to the university and passed a certificate. That's 48,000. And I'm saying, as of now, that number is at 87,000 in terms of the education report, higher education report. Of course, the report says there are 201,000 that have actually gone through the system. It means certificates and everything. Now, of course, Mr. Spall found it very useful to put these numbers this way, to show that the blacks are progressing much faster. But he forgot one thing, which is the denominator. And when you denominate that to know what it is, then this is the performance of blacks. So, and the whites continue to outperform blacks. Now, if we look at educational attainment across time, and this is from 1996 to 2011. On the left is the proportion of whites, and on the right is the proportion of blacks. The green inner circle says the proportion of those for each age group that have a degree. This one is the proportion of whites who have a higher secondary, and this one is those who have primary. And this one's here, Tani Willems, who never went to school. He's old there. The same here is the proportion of blacks who have a degree to the right, proportion who have a secondary, proportion who have primary, and of course, Ukumalo here never went to school. And this is the age group in which they are. And this is as of 2016. So you can see what the challenge is. And this has to be understood with the struggles for education in South Africa. So here, if you look at South Africa, here, if you look at the whites, this is what you get in Korea. This is Korea here. And this is what you have in, yes. Now, in terms of absolute numbers, here we are looking at absolute numbers. Of course, whites are fewer. It's only 3 point something million in the country. And those with degrees is that number there. And for blacks, that's the number. And that's about 50, what is the population? 40 something million. So very, very few. So the question that you have to ask yourselves, which the statistics is revealing, is at what rate should the graduates be produced in order to deal with the development challenges of South Africa? Because this is far from enough, and I'm sure everybody knows. And of course, we are faced with mega challenges, but at what rate should that be produced to actually manage to solve the problems? What is concerning is that the rate of production is one which is declining for blacks. And that is what is concerning. Because if you have a dam that is leaking, it will never get full to the level that we want to get to. Now, this graph tells you how many children start grade 1 and who are in primary. This one is who are in secondary, and these ones are not in education. They could have concluded. But those who are in education are these blocks. In TVET is the orange, and the university is the blue. 738,000 and 1 million. But in that 738 and 1 million, for a progression of a system that can only produce 150,000 into the system to go forward, which is constipated with a million, it's a problem. Now, what has happened? Now, what is happening here in terms of education outcomes, what is very important here is that this is what was happening in 1994, and when people were appointing for skill, and these are proportions, and that's white people, that's Indian people, that's colored people, that's black people. And you can see for this age group 15 to 24, the proportion that was skilled amongst whites was 25%. And amongst Indians in the 15 to 24, it's 18%. Amongst blacks, it's 10, it was what? In that age group, 10%. But amongst, for 15 to 24, 25 to 34, was about 18% compared to about 29% amongst Indians and almost 39% amongst whites. Now, when you think about this thing called demographic dividend, which is a new, it's not new, it's now almost a decade old as language, but it talks about, is the youth, the question that Mahlatini asks, that when a child is born in Africa, we feel happy because they are the future. And that's what Mahlatini says, and of course that's when the demographic dividend becomes an issue, as to whether the future is actually the future. Now, moving forward to 2016, this is what we see. That is, amongst Indians, they grew from less than 20% to 41% as people who are employed in the skill. And those who are 25 to 34 to 45%. Amongst whites, they are about 58%. Amongst blacks, the proportion not only was low at 18% a year, that number 20 years ago, it has actually contracted to 14% in 2016. Now that's the challenge, that education as a transformative lever has to tackle. And that's where we are. And that's where the feast must fall, the Soweto uprisings, the 1953 statement of Verwoerd becomes very important. Now the question that Yonela Diko was very unhappy with when I raised this matter and said a statistician should not interpret statistics, he must leave it to the public to do so. Now I said, oh, so the priest must read the Bible and never give a sermon. A very interesting thing, how interesting that you can read the Bible and not give a sermon and expect the statistician-general not to interpret the statistics. How misguided Yonela is. We asked South Africans what they are ranking as important. Of course, they said, we want water, this unemployment is worrying us. And of course, electricity is getting costly. And of course, I mean, I'm paying a lot of money every month for electricity. It's too much. And of course, these are municipalities. Universally, the municipalities we're talking about this thing. And of course, what is the priority around these issues that we are talking about? Education, ranked 15. And of course, when you look at unemployment rate by educational status, that which we are dealing with, which is graduates 7.4 and matric 27 and less than matric 33%. And these are the bulk of the population. And unless we tackle this issue of ability to be absorbed in the labor market, yes, we can talk about entrepreneurship, but you need the skill to undertake the work that is needed. Entrepreneurship is good, I'm sure. But entrepreneurship is like looking at society with a bell-shaped. And there'll only be probably 10% at the top end of that who are really entrepreneurial. The rest are those who will actually provide the skill for the entrepreneur to succeed. So, what have we said? Mandela said significant progress is possible and is within our reach if only we plan in the detail. And this is what we need to do, to plan in the detail, to provide the data as I provided it here, to provide the data in a way that can be understood. This is just a description. Here is diagnosis, and here is modeling. And those who are in planning must be seized with modeling. And here is the intersection of this description and the diagnosis. Diagnosis for saying the statistics are saying, and the diagnosis for predicting what the outcomes are likely to be, so that there can be prescription through a plan to implement those things that solve the problem. So coming back to what the report says, in its raw form as a statistical release, the grants have increased by national government. They've gone to 44 from 41%. The tuition fees, contribution has dropped from 34 to 32, and because of the grants. Salaries have almost stayed the same, taking as from the expenditure side around 58%, 57.2 and 58. Capital expenditure grown by about 100 million to 6.3 billion. And of course, number of students enrolled increased by 9,375. But generally, the role as students is the same, almost 1 million, in a system, the capacity of which can only generate 150,000 a year. Meaning for a 3-year degree, there can only be 450,000. But it has 1 million. It's constipated, it's wasteful, its progression ratios show a declining cohort success. And this has to make South Africans sit on a pin. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we open the floor for your questions. I'll take the first 3 from Pretoria. By show of hands, please indicate if you have an issue to raise. The question for a Statistician-General. You're noted, sir. I'll take the second one. Third one. Andy, are you still there?
Yes, they said I'm here.
Do you have questions? Do you have questions in Cape Town?
It looks like everything is clear this side.
Okay, we'll take your questions, sir.
I'm Bongani Nkosi from the Sowetan. SG, it looks like in the face of campaigns like Fees Must Fall and Outsourcing Must Fall, varsities have not been quite affected in terms of their finances, because we see that their revenue actually increased from 2015 to 2016. Would you say that this is basically that government has actually managed to actually cushion them? This is because government has pumped more money. And also, when you talk about the unemployment rate by education status, we have the figures from from those with less than matric to to those termed as other tertiary, and that's 17%. Who are those really? Is it TVET students and those with certificates? Thank you.
Thank you.
We take another question.
Well, there's no question, let me
There's
answer.
no question.
And also, you remember that there is another session that is coming after this. I thought you said there were two questions. There's just one.
Questions from one person.
Oh, I see. I was listening, but I was not seeing. Look, no, thanks for those questions. Well, yes, I think government provided more money to ensure that the students are sponsored at a university, and of course we saw that higher education inflation actually remained the same because there were no fee increases. What the numbers are saying are not, I mean, I am not saying that your question, but I need to say that, yes, we can see that, but what the numbers are saying is that the education system at university is capable of producing, that is from high school, a maximum of probably 500,000 students, but it has 1 million students. Now, if first year is 150,000, second year must have 150,000 if those students don't die or don't leave university. At third year, there must be 150,000 if the effects of mortality and migration don't take root. When you add all those up, you must have a university population of 450,000 people, given that the South African degree is 3 years. Now, let's say it was 4 years, then you'll have 600,000. And then you have about 10,000, 5,000 masters, and then a few sprinkling of PhDs. But we have 1 million in that space. So you are having 500,000 more. So the question of fees, it's not where the question is. The question is where the system is really very inefficient and is constipated. Because it means people are not progressing at the rate at which they come in. And that's what makes the university system very, very expensive. So you are paying for people who should not be there, who should have passed and gone. Now, the hashtag Fees Must Fall is saying, yes, we can move and be out of here, provided we are paid for and we are provided with the resources to make us go through. So if that was the case, you'd reduce the population at university by 500,000. Yes, by 500. Because that 500,000 is not necessary. Even 200,000. And then if you work the arithmetic, it just tells you that we are not getting the stale bread out of the system. I mean, we had a problem when I was at university. We missed up eating the bread for one day because we went for competition of soccer. And when we came back, that bread was there and we had to eat it the following day, not on the day, 2 days later. And then fresh bread, because the ordering was continuing, fresh bread came and we had to eat the bread that was 2 days old every time. And there was no solution to it. You've got to solve that problem and get the stale bread out of the system. It ended up being warmed so that we could eat it, but the staleness still came through. It was expensive. Now, the second question, which was employment, yes. The other, and you see, you got to distinguish this other. Because when you break that other, tertiary, and break it up by age group, obviously you also look at university by age group, the rate of unemployment that other for TVETs, for specific age groups, is significantly and much, much higher, and doesn't follow the trend for those who are 35 and above for TVETs. So if you compare the two for university and tertiary, for lower than 34, and compare them with 35 and above for tertiary and TVETs, for those who are above, the unemployment for these are much significantly higher, and begs the question, in a skill-hungry country, why is it that the TVETs are not employed? It begs the question, what is being taught at the TVETs? And I think, and where did it change? And what needs to be done? So that's the issue. I saw somebody walking there. Oh, Cape Town. I was wondering. So that's the issue, that the numbers are shedding light to ask more questions so that shed light on the policy in order that the appropriate responses come up. And this issue of education is one where the numbers are shedding light in ways that solutions have to be found. Otherwise, the notion of a demographic dividend is not possible for blacks and colors. Okay. Oh, yes, you're asking again.
Yes. By reverting to your stale bread analogy, are you saying that implementation of free education will actually help the country in that it could reduce this 500,000, this million figure?
Well, the million figure has been stuck with us there. It's constipated and they are not getting out of the system. And if you look at this graph here, and I think you're asking a very interesting question. I hope that I'm not taken to be saying people are stale bread, but the analogy is very palpable. You see, if you look at this, and I want to come here, and as somebody who has studied mathematics and statistics and graphs, there's something called slope or rate of change. And if you measure this slope here and measure it there, these two slopes are the same. So the rate of change is the same for whites and blacks. It's even better here. The rate of change is much better here for blacks than for whites, where it is flat. What it is saying is that for every cohort of students that came into the system, more passed and succeeded. Here in the 80s, around here, and that's what makes many people angry, 70s and so on. Why? Because the priests and the UN and everybody was funding these people fully as blacks, and they succeeded. But here, why is fees must fall? Because they can't afford the education. So the graph is self-evident as to what solution should be. Lincoln says it is self-evident. is a Euclidean law that things that are equal to the same thing are equal to each other. And here, things that are equal to the same thing, which is this slope here, are equal to each other, although the y-intercept is different. That is, the level at which we start is different. But here, things are not equal to the same thing. They're not equal to each other. And we have to ask the question, why? And the answers are, the students are saying fees must fall. Now we are stuck with almost 500,000 in there that can move from a system that is only capable of providing 150,000. You must find in that system at most 500,000, not 1 million. And because it is sitting in there and failing, it's taking up resources, you see. So there has to be a solution. It can't go on like that for 7 years, 5 years of that 900,000 in a system that can only produce, that is capable of only producing 150,000 a year. So it has to find a solution. Okay. I'm sure the Minister of Police wants to come in. Or are there more questions? And that's what has to seize the minds of South Africans. And this is what these numbers are saying. And Mr. Yonel, I cannot say that statistics cannot describe the totality of a nation. It does. So let's look at the numbers, at the facts, and understand them. And stop saying that the statistician should not interpret the numbers. Who should then? Yourself? You can't. You are not a trained statistician. You'll make a terrible interpretation of the numbers, and you'll mislead everybody. But when they are described and explained, then we can engage from different perspectives. And everybody can contribute positively to the answers. So let's not stifle that by saying statisticians shouldn't interpret the numbers. They should. It is their task to do so. Anybody who says statisticians shouldn't interpret the numbers must have their heads checked. It can't be. It's a wrong notion. It stifles knowledge. Completely. Oh, no, thank you very much.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank you. Statistician General will be available for further engagement, I believe, as well as the panel.